Episode 50, December the 8th, 1914. Revenge. I saw Von Spee meet his doom. By Rear-Admiral the Honourable Barry Bingham VC. Read by Mark Scott. Commander Barry Bingham took part in the battles of Heligoland Bight, the Falkland Islands and Jutland, and won the VC at the last named battle for the gallant way in which he led the 13th Destroyer Flotilla, of which he was in command, into action. It was on November the 8th that Vice Admiral Sir Frederick C. Doveton Sturdy, KCB, CVO, CMG, left the Admiralty, where he had been hitherto serving, and came down to Devonport in order to hoist his flag in HMS Invincible. Admiral Sturdy, temporarily appointed Commander-in-Chief, South Atlantic and South Pacific, had instructions to take the Invincible and Inflexible, Captain Richard F. Fillmore, CB, MVO, under his orders and proceed southwards at the maximum economical speed. At a certain rendezvous, he was to be joined by other cruisers already out in the South Atlantic waters. Finally, with this combined force, he was to seek out and annihilate Von Spee's squadron, and there was to be no return home until these orders had been carried out to the letter. The first port of call was St. Vincent, the capital of the Cape Verde Islands, where he paused only to coal. Thence to his secret rendezvous at Brollis Rocks, some 30 miles off the coast of Brazil, for a similar purpose. At Brollis Rocks, we were joined by the following cruisers, which placed themselves under the flag of Admiral Sturdy: Carnarvon, Captain Mel Skipwith, flying flag of Rear Admiral Stoddart; Kent, Captain J.D. Allen; Cornwall, Captain W.M. Ellerton; Glasgow, Captain John Luce; Bristol, Captain B.H. Fanshawe; Otranto, Captain J.R. Seagrave. The above ships, together with 2 battle cruisers, left the Brollis Rocks and steered for the Falkland Islands, the whole squadron proceeding in extended formation, with an interval of 10 miles between each unit, and with the Invincible in the centre, to enable the remainder of the squadron quickly to concentrate on her. The object of this formation was to provide for the possibility of running across Von Spee's squadron. Acting completely in the dark, Admiral Sturdy decided to make for the Falkland Islands, which, it may be explained, lie 240 miles from the coast of South America, and 300 miles northeast of Cape Horn, and, using Port Stanley as his headquarters, to institute a series of searching operations from that point. The first cast was to be round Cape Horn, and then there was to be a draw of the route to Valparaiso. If that failed, the Admiral had no option except to retrace his steps and try his luck the other side. If this ground too proved barren, it would be necessary to search further afield. It was at 10:30 on the morning of December the 7th when the squadron steamed in and took up anchoring billets in Port William, the outer harbour of the Falklands, while the 2 light cruisers, for the Bristol had now been joined by a sister ship, the Glasgow, proceeded into the inner harbour, Port Stanley, also the name of the capital, which lies at the head of the harbour. The first thing to greet our eyes was the old Canopus, resting on the mud, anchored fore and aft, temporarily converted into a floating fortress. In fact, the ship had become the defender of the Falklands. This ancient battleship had been dispatched at the last moment by the Admiralty to reinforce Craddock's ill-fated ships, which as a squadron the Admiral knew to be outclassed by the German China Squadron. Realising that the Good Hope and Monmouth were no match for the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, Craddock had earnestly petitioned the Admiral to allot him 1 or more modern armoured cruisers, such as the Defence or Warrior. These 2 ships, however, could not at that time be spurred from the Mediterranean, presumably owing to the fact that the Goeben and Breslau were still at large in Turkish waters. Thus, a request for material assistance brought nothing better than the obsolete Canopus, with a maximum speed of 16 knots, 4 old 12-inch guns of low calibre, obsolete 6-inch quick-firing guns, tolerably useful at a range of about 9,000 yards. Yet even this assistance, whatever it might have been worth, was denied to Craddock, because a series of defects in the engine room caused the Canopus to remain behind at Port Stanley when he left that port at the end of October. At the first sign of dawn the next morning, December the 8th, coaling began in all ships of the squadron, other than the Bristol and Glasgow, who had completed the previous evening. The Kent took up position of guardship outside the harbour of Port William. 2 hours' work in, the Invincible and Flexible yielded some 400 tons each. Then came an interval for a well-earned breakfast. The third cup of coffee and marmalade stage was being reached when a signalman dashed down to the wardroom and, with praiseworthy efforts to preserve his official calm, reported that one of the shore signal stations, Sapper Hill, had sighted 2 foreign men of war. In a few minutes the news was confirmed and 3 more ships were reported to the southward. Next, they were finally identified as being the German China Squadron. In truth, here was Admiral von Spee and his squadron steaming right into the jaws of the lion. Out of touch by wireless since he left Valparaiso, von Spee had dawdled down the coast and round the Cape to the Falklands, never dreaming for an instant that 2 powerful battle cruisers had been detached with the special object of meeting him. Amidst loud cheers, the captain gave the order to cast off colliers. Then followed the thrilling notes of the bugle call, "Action." At the same time, the whole squadron was ordered to raise steam for full speed with all dispatch. As guardship, the Kent had steam up, and this cruiser was directed to observe and report the enemy's movements. When within 15 miles of the Falklands, von Spee, who was flying his flag in the Scharnhorst, sent the Gneisenau and Nuremberg ahead to a distance of less than 6 miles from the harbour for the purpose of reconnoitring, while he himself with the other ships remained approximately 8 miles off. According to the statement made subsequently by prisoners from the Gneisenau, it appears that the sub-lieutenant, who had been sent aloft with powerful glasses to ascertain what British ships were in the harbour, reported to his captain that there were 2 battle cruisers and 5 other cruisers anchored there. Such a statement sounded absolutely incredible to the captain, until a senior lieutenant, the gunnery officer, who was next sent up, confirmed the first report. The presence of dreadnought cruisers was thus placed beyond all doubt, and the fact could only be explained on the assumption of there being Japanese battle cruisers. And here is to be found the explanation of the myth, industriously circulated by the English press, to the effect that Japanese ships were present at the Battle of the Falkland Islands. In any case, the enemy had an unwelcome surprise. It was for the Gneisenau to receive the second unpleasant shock when a report was heard and 2 12-inch shells, about 9:20 a.m, dropped quite close to her, apparently from nowhere, but in reality the result of indirect fire from the Canopus, which lay obscured from seaward by an intervening hill. Controlled from a DPF erected ashore, the Canopus guns fired 1 more salvo of 3 shells. This bombardment the Germans imagined to come from a concealed land battery, and thus received their third surprise. To experience 3 such shocks at a comparatively early hour was something altogether too much for them. Von Spee recalled his 2 ships, and the whole squadron promptly took to their heels at maximum speed, probably about 21 knots, and steered in an easterly direction. They were closely shadowed by the Kent, who remained at a suitable distance and reported their movements until the fleet had steam up and could chase their quarry. It was 9:45 when we left harbour on a glorious morning, the bright sun, almost dead calm, and the clearest atmosphere. So great was the visibility that on clearing the entrance of the harbour, we were able at once to take the range of the enemy, the tops of whose masts and funnels were just above the horizon. The distance was found to be 38,000 yards, i.e. 19 sea miles or nearly 22 land miles. With their superior speed The two battle cruisers rapidly forged ahead of the older ships, and then, easing down at 11:15 o'clock, waited for the others to close up. Admiral Sturdy, however, in order not to lose the advantage of fine weather conditions, cracked on once more about 12:20, working up to 25 knots or more. Fully convinced that our lighter craft could deal with them, he ignored the smaller German cruisers, and his sole determination was to force an action on the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau as soon as possible. Soon after 1 o'clock, at a range of 17,000 yards, A turret, under my charge, got the order to fire a sighting shot at the Leipzig, the enemy's rear cruiser. Giving the guns their maximum elevation, I fired, and the result was short. The next round, fired at a distance of about 16,500 yards, nearly hit the Leipzig, who thereupon turned away with Nuremberg and Dresden to the southwest. These light cruisers were at once followed by Glasgow, Kent and Cornwall. The fire of the Invincible and Inflexible was then directed on the Scharnhorst, who rapidly came into range. The effect of this was that the Scharnhorst turned 8 points to port, in other words, took a right-angled turn to the left. We followed suit, and thus, at 1:30, on parallel courses, and at a distance of 16,000 yards, the action between the two pairs of large cruisers commenced. Within a few minutes, the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, who were obviously concentrating on the Invincible, made a good start by hitting us at 1:45 with their third salvo. We then sheared off a couple of points, thereby throwing the Germans off their range, and the Inflexible followed our motions. The fire then opened rather rapidly, and the enemy at 2:10 made an attempt to get away by turning 10 points to starboard. This caused a lull in the action from 2:15 until 2:45. At 2:45, we again opened fire on them. The enemy replied at 2:55. From now until 3:15 p.m, the fighting was very fierce, the range decreasing to 10,000 yards. Both the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were hit several times. Scharnhorst, on fire forward, slackened her rate of fire, and accurate shooting was not maintained. Between 3:15 and 3:30, our ship was so hampered by funnel and gun smoke that Admiral Sturdy was obliged to turn his ships in a complete circle to rid himself of this nuisance. The Scharnhorst, seeing this turn, made a fresh attempt to withdraw from the action, or perhaps it was to bring her other broadside into action. In any case, she turned 10 points away from us. However, once clear of smoke, we with our superior speed drew up into gun range, and fighting recommenced with all its former vigour. From 3:30 onwards, the Scharnhorst was being badly hit. It was noticed that in many parts of the hull, fires were breaking out, and that 2 of the 4 funnels were missing. From this came an encouraging message from the captain, who told me down the voice pipe that my turret was hitting well. Personally, I had observed 2 well-placed shots land successfully just above the waterline, abreast of where the second funnel ought to have been. At first I found it a little difficult to differentiate between the flash of the enemy's guns and one's own hits, but observation soon enlightened me on the fact that when you really strike home on a ship, you see a little red glow, or in the case of lyddite, a cloud of yellow smoke suddenly appear. Admiral Sturdy reports that notwithstanding the punishment the Scharnhorst was receiving, her fire was steady and accurate, and the persistency of her salvos was remarkable. At 3:50 p.m, the German flagship was looking pretty sickly, practically motionless, fires everywhere, and only 1 funnel still standing. Finally, at 4:04 p.m, she rolled quietly over on one side, lay on her beam ends, and took a headlong dive, bows first, at 4:17 p.m. This news I conveyed to my men in the 4 different chambers of the turret by means of the voice pipe, and through the same channel could be heard the echoes of the cheering that rose from the very bowels of the ship. In a modern naval action, where all men are well down under armour, those who actually witness events do not amount to more than 2 score out of a complement of 990. And of a turret's crew of 40, only 4 actually see the fight, viz. The 2 gun layers, the turret trainer, and the range taker. The remainder being distributed in the gun house, the working chamber, the magazine, and shell room. Gneisenau, who had been following the Scharnhorst, continued to concentrate her fire on us, leaving to their fate any possible survivors from her sister ship. Under the circumstances, any life-saving was out of the question, and not a soul from the Scharnhorst survived. Now, pitted against the Inflexible and ourselves, the solitary Gneisenau fought a losing fight for nearly 2 hours. Admiral Sturdy in his report says, "At 4:47, the Gneisenau was hit severely. At 5:08 p.m, she was evidently in serious straits, and her fire slackened very much. 3 ships, Invincible, Inflexible, Carnarvon, were concentrating on her from different bearings. At 5:15, she hit the Invincible. This was her last effective effort. At 5:30 p.m, she was scarcely moving, with 2 funnels gone and several fires ablaze. A quarter of an hour later, the Gneisenau stopped firing, having expended all ammunition, including even practiced projectiles. Almost on the stroke of 6 o'clock, the Gneisenau rolled over and dived down in precisely the same way as her sister before her. The survivors, running over the uppermost side, threw themselves into the water, while the British ship steamed up at full speed to the spot. A few minutes ago, the cradle of a proud ship, and now only marked by oil, wreckage, and masses of struggling humanity. Every available boat was lowered, and while Invincible and Inflexible each picked up 108 and 62 survivors respectively, the Carnarvon, who had by now joined us, saved 20. The survivors included the commander of the Gneisenau and about 15 officers. I went away in one of the cutters and succeeded in picking up about 40 survivors, most of them in a wounded condition, and all in various stages of exhaustion. And small wonder, for the ship in her last stages must have been a very hell on earth. Anyhow, it was a gruesome business for the rescuers. A word must now be said about the doings of the smaller cruisers who had been left behind when the battle cruisers made their final spurt after the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. But as the Bristol and Otranto have already been dealt with, there remain only the Kent, Glasgow and Cornwall. These 3 confined themselves to chasing the enemy's 3 light cruisers, which we left steaming to the southwest. More specifically, the Glasgow and Cornwall hunted the Leipzig, the Kent chased the Nuremberg, while with the advantages of speed and a good start, the Dresden got clear away. Very different was the fate of the Leipzig and Nuremberg, who were both sunk with colours flying, after a stern chase and gallant resistance, which in the case of the latter ship was prolonged right up to the last moment of daylight. Probably the Kent had reason to be most proud of herself on account of an extraordinary feat performed by her engine room staff, who managed to get 23 knots out of a 22-knot ship that had been serving 13 years. The captain's racy account, as he gave it to me a few days later, of what they did and how they did it, deserves to be quoted in full. We sat on the safety valves and forced the boilers fit to burst. We ran short of coal, so we burnt any spare wood left on the ship. About 6 p.m. we got within range. The Nuremberg started hitting us before we could hit her, so we went at it, hammer and tongs. When it was getting dark, I closed to between 2,000 and 3,000 yards. This paid me very well, because I had 6-inch guns against her 4-inch, and I found the closer I was getting, the better I was hitting. We put her down at 7:15, almost in the dark. It was a devilish good scrap. After this performance, it was not surprising to find his name among the list of CBs. After the battle, the squadron spent a fruitless and wearisome 3 days in searching for the Dresden, until the rapidly depleting coal supply rendered a return to the Falklands imperative. It was December the 11th we re-entered Port Stanley. There was now time to take general stock of damages and casualties sustained by the different ships of the squadron. The Invincible was hit no fewer than 22 times, but only twice below the waterline. Of these 2 hits, one shell penetrated beneath the armour belt and exploded in a 100-ton coal bunker, alongside the magazine of the midship turret. The extra plating, however, between the 2 compartments withstood the explosion, and the shell merely expended itself in the bunker, which instantly flooded. To right matters, the corresponding bunker on the other side of the ship had only to be flooded. The other shell hit us point blank on the stem and filled the collision compartment in the bows. The remaining shells were distributed over the upper and mess decks, and most of them burst without doing anything more than superficial damage. Our wardroom mess, which we had left a few hours ago in all the amenity of an English breakfast room, was completely wrecked. Tables, chairs, sideboards, and piano were now powdered to matchwood, and all the whole had the appearance of a hay and straw yard. In truth, there was nothing left standing. Among the ruins of the piano there was found not a tuning fork, but one of our best electro-plated set that had been blown out of its green baize nest some 30 feet away. One of the tripods belonging to the foremast was hit and broken. Yet the mast continued to stand happily on its 2 remaining legs. A more convincing demonstration of the merits of their doctrine could not have been wished for by the advocates of the tripod mast. Another of the enemy's 8.2 shells found its way into the Admiral's still room, where it lay comfortably amongst his jams and refused to burst. Nicely burnished, this shell became the most valued trophy and cherished ornament of the wardroom flat. But the amazing feature of the whole affair was that there were no casualties whatever, with the solitary exception of Commander Townsend, who received from a splinter a slight wound in his tendon Achilles and was thereby compelled to remain on the sick list for a few weeks. Such good fortune was doubtless attributable to that organisation and distribution of personnel which the turret system demands. That the Inflexible had been hit only 3 times seems to indicate that the Germans had bestowed the greater part of their attention upon the Invincible. The Kent received 38 hits, as was to be expected from the close range at which her action was fought, but sustained no damage in any vital spot. Nevertheless, this ship had the misfortune to lose the greater part of a gun's crew belonging to a 6-inch casement by the bursting of one of the Nuremberg shells, which by sheer bad luck entered the casemate through the gun port and accounted for 6 lives and 4 wounded. The Cornwall was hit 18 times, but received no casualties. The Glasgow was hit twice. She had 1 man killed and 4 wounded. The Carnarvon received no damage. In fact, she was never hit. Though affiliated to us through the operation, that cruiser had no opportunity of displaying her potential worth or of showing what she could have done if chance had pitted her against ships of the same calibre. The opportunity was also taken to effect temporary repairs of the worst shell holes in the various decks. No words can paint the delirious joy manifested by the inhabitants of the Falkland Islands when they heard the good news. There was now, once and for all, an end to their worst fears and apprehensions. Nor were they lacking in giving vent to what they felt, not only in words, but in unlimited quantities of flowers and fruit. In return, we presented them with a souvenir in the shape of a piece of our shattered steel mast, burnished and mounted on oak, with a suitable inscription underneath.
Goodbye.